And in code reviews, both sides are learning. Like when I review a PR for X, Y, or Z for a client or for my own projects, I will see how people have approached something that may affect how I start approaching that same problem. Like there's a real benefit in that because one of the challenges I had when I started managing people or running teams is that for a longer time than I'd like to admit, I would get upset that they didn't write the code the way I would instead of write the code that accomplishes the job. And separating those two was really gave me a whole lot of freedom to just because they didn't approach the way I do, how can I learn from this?
Hey there, welcome to Better Talks, the podcast.
I am Rick.
And I am Oscar. And today we are joined by Shawn Wildermuth, who is a consultant, an architect, an instructor, and a Microsoft MVP. Welcome.
Welcome, Shawn.
Hey there, how you guys doing?
Well, doing great. It's so great to have you on the show because I was just talking to Oscar before we went into the recording, and it feels to me like you've been there for the majority of my career, at least visible out there in the community, adding value. And then I think I read that you are now moved into the Netherlands, right? So you're living in the Netherlands now?
Yeah.
So there's like a ton of things I would like to know. First off, what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis, and what's your job currently?
Job is a loose word, to be perfectly honest. I do a lot of little things. I'm an instructor, still a Pluralsight instructor, so I have a number of courses up there. I work with clients, coaching them, giving code reviews and architectural reviews. That's sort of ad hoc as I need to, and I'm kind of obsessed with my YouTube channel where I try to put out a video about every week, except for the last 2 months when I was packing everything I owned into a bunch of suitcases.
Probably.
Yeah. So I like to think that my job is to learn. So when something new that interests me comes out, I can go ahead and learn that and then figure out a way that I can sort of talk about it, whether that's at a conference, whether that's on my YouTube channel, whether that's individual training for companies. And I mostly focus on .NET for the back end. I do a little front end with .NET, but mostly it's back end work. And JavaScript and TypeScript on the front end. Primarily in Vue, but I've worked with other front end technologies, Svelte and Angular longer ago. But that's sort of where my passion is creating apps that are accessible across a network connection.
I actually really like the way of saying my job is to learn.
Yeah.
And then presumably apply what you've learned in the rest of the part of your job. But still, you saying that my job is to learn actually already says that you're probably passionate about learning all of that new stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea where that passion for learning all of that new stuff, where that comes from? Is that pure interest? Is it something else?
It's sort of the way I'm built, and fortunately or unfortunately, is when I got my first computer as a young child, way before either of you were born. When you say I've been around for your entire career, I get that you're saying I'm old. That's fine with me.
We're things we think we're old.
I think that makes me feel.
Yeah.
And one of my early experiences with computers is not only sort of programming and figuring it out with only like magazines and maybe one book that came with the computer, but also I was getting a lot of, let's say, not completely legal software from my friends, and it didn't come with any manuals, or F1 didn't open a help screen, and so I gained this ability to figure out when it wasn't obvious how to figure it out, and sort of break down of, oh, that's what that does, oh, that's what that does, and I think that's benefited my career. But I don't go out of my way to, I have to learn this, or this is going to be popular. I'm going to learn that. And if you look back through my history, you'll know that there's a bunch of times that, I bet on the wrong horse sometimes. And I think that's just sort of natural. People that with technology moving so fast, some of it I find really interesting and never happened. And some of it, is very sort of basic. And I wanted to learn it so that, I could talk to other people about it and to work with teams and to be able to hire teams to do projects, like all of that. But I think it sort of comes from just my history. I'm just curious about what the next thing is. It hasn't always been programming. As a kid, it was astronomy. As a young adult, it was music, um, even though I had been doing some programming before then. And then I started getting hired at a series of jobs where they couldn't find anyone else that knew some obscure language, and they'd hire me to build a whole system in a language that was completely broken
Wow.
over and over. The old folks on the podcast will remember Paradox, maybe.
Oh, but I remember Paradox.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was just a nightmare.
And then if you look now at what happened to the software development industry and all of the, we've talked about this earlier, all of the added abstraction and all of the new cool frameworks that bring all of that functionality with them as soon as you start a new project. What's your take on, let's say, how software development evolved over the last couple of years?
Well, I'll talk about it even longer than that because I think we're in a sort of repeating cycle that the cycle always starts with fear. Like right now, it's will AI take my job fear, but it's every 10 years this has been the case my entire career. And those abstractions, while we think about simple abstractions as maybe problematic because we don't want to get too far from X, Y, or Z, each of those abstractions has added value to productivity. So when I started C++, you were doing all your own memory management. You were handling and being, frankly, it was really difficult to make sure you weren't leaking or that you weren't taking inputs that could be executed for security violations, all of that stuff. And then when I came to C Sharp, I really was, you're not going to take my pointers away from me. I was one of those guys. Until I went to this course that taught C Sharp and really convinced me that you don't want to do any of this stuff. And so that was sort of an early abstraction. And then it became another abstraction to think, you know what, I don't want to have to think about accessing hardware directly. I'm going to use some abstraction that says, oh, I can do this and that, and not having to understand the wire protocol to devices to print through an RS-232 port. That's not something that I should care about. And so we got to a point recently where the operating system was no longer an abstraction we cared about. That's when containers really came in. I'm going to have some code. I'm going to throw it in a container. And what the OS is under it, I kind of don't care, right? The container is going to take care of that for me. And so it feels like just one more step of like I can focus on what I find the most interesting, which is sort of the business case or the problem space, right? I can focus on, this is how I figure out how the user does X, Y, or Z instead of worrying about how do I write this and create a format to write to disk or to write to a database. Or it just becomes a little easier. Doesn't mean you don't have to fall down that hole again occasionally when you need to optimize or you want to worry about scalability and some other things. But it means that most of my job isn't worrying about the minutia, so worrying about the problem. And the problem is what's always drawn me to it. It's never been the technology.
Yeah, I was like thinking about abstractions. On one hand, it's the old guy in you is like, but you should know the layer beneath it because if something goes wrong, you should know what's going on, or if you have scaling issues, those. And on the other hand, like the abstraction is actually enabling you to think more freely, to think creatively into the actual problem that you're trying to solve. But you're bouncing between those constantly. And every new generation, like every 5 to 10 years, that like you see new kids coming from school, like they started with this. They started with everything's over the internet and everything's async. And do they really need to know the whole stack?
Yeah. Though I do think, some of the old man in me is like, a lot of people that are web developers don't really understand how HTTP works, and that there's no state, and like these things that when they're just writing APIs and they think they magically work is, very similar to what happened 20 years ago with COM. Like people are like, oh, this will just solve everything with COM, and not understanding what's actually happening gets in the way of that. Doesn't mean you have to actually move the bits yourself, but understanding some of the basics, like why is asynchronous important in this scenario? Why, when I'm writing JavaScript, should almost nothing be sync, just because of the nature of the way that JavaScript and Node works. Those are important, but that doesn't mean I need to understand, how to write a message pump. Sort of a classic example.
You don't have to learn from the bottom up. I think you step into the abstraction that is most current in this business, and then you might go down with more experience. But like I'm far from the hardware, though like there was some schooling there. I'm really not thinking about it. But I am thinking about the HTTP stack. I am thinking about latency and those more infrastructural things a lot more than maybe my younger peers, because that's where the pain points were.
Right.
And you will still sometimes see them, and you will be the one being able to solve them.
But that's because of the scars that you have.
Yeah, also
because you ran into the issues earlier,
like,
right?
Don't do that. That doesn't work. Like you need to also step away from that. It's like, no, try it. Maybe it does work. Maybe you'll learn something.
Yeah, and sometimes people need to learn by failing, and just getting them to trust, the senior developers isn't always the best way to for people to learn, which is I find interesting. One of the cases where I think this whole idea of sort of abstraction, like one of my more popular videos on YouTube is explaining stack versus heap in garbage collection. Like this is, for me, was such a basic thing. It doesn't affect how I write code most days, but it does affect how I write code, like understanding how things are passed across the stack and memory management versus garbage collection in stack versus heap. Like all of that stuff isn't going to affect the big, like most of the code you write. But at some point you're going to go, well, why do records and structs matter? And you kind of can't get your head around it until you dig a little deeper.
And then it's hard to explain why you would use one over the other.
Yeah.
And in the end, after you went to that level, then basically next time you see an exception with a stack trace, you also know why it's formatted in a similar way and what happened and those things. But that's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, teaching from the bottom up isn't helpful. Like this is what a processor is and this is what a register is. That's not what we should learn day one.
No, for me, from a line of code to actually ones and zeros, there's like the last few miles there are like completely lost to me. Like I know it works. I still he did some assembly back in the day, but like that's where it ends. Like and there are a few layers underneath.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a film a few years ago about diversity in technology.
Hello World.
One of the things Hello World.
I've seen it.
One of the things that fascinated me was that when I talked to this university that changed how many women came into the technology, DEI in the United States is a dirty word right now, but that's not really what I'm talking about, is they made a change from Java to Python as the first language they taught. Because with one line of Python, you can show the student that something is happening. And that, I think, is where you really learn and get the bug for it if you think you'll like it one day. Whereas C# until recently, and certainly Java, and certainly C++, and all those languages, there's so much ceremony before you write print line hello world, right? And I like that that's sort of where we're going. Like I'm not advocating Python as the best language to do every system, but for learning, it is the most is what's the word I'm looking for?
Maybe
It's the one that evokes accessible, sure, but it evokes the magic of what programming is the quickest.
Yeah.
At some point, you need to learn the other layers as you run into problems, but there is some magic about that. That when I came up, you couldn't just do that.
Nope.
You know, Commodore Basic and assembly, or really machine language before assembly, was the way I learned, and I realized very quickly that that is not what I want to do every day.
No, I can understand that one. One of the things that we started out with is the fact that you live in the Netherlands now. Is there a very
welcome.
interesting? Yeah, welcome. Is there a very interesting? Very good story there, or was it just convenience, or if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. Well, I've always had a warm spot for the Dutch in my heart for a long time. I moved to the Netherlands in 92 or 93. I think it was 92. I didn't mean to move to the Netherlands, but I was a busker, and I spent a couple of years here playing music on the street, and I just really loved the Dutch people. Little did I know then how few Dutch people are in Amsterdam, but that's a whole nother story.
True. Very true.
Yeah. And so I always thought that one day I would end up back here. And the last few, probably 6 months, my wife and I were discussing sort of changing up what we liked. We had a overly big house in the United States that was just too much for the two of us. It really is, for a family of 6, would have been great in that house. It was just too much. And after COVID, my health was like a real issue because I got very, I'd always been a bit sedentary, but not like I got after COVID. Like I got used to being in one place. And so we wanted to move someplace that had the ability to have a walking lifestyle, like a carless lifestyle. And we couldn't find any place in the States that we really thought would give us that. And, I went back to, talking with my wife, we looked at a bunch of places, and I kept on coming back to the Netherlands. The Netherlands have a very friendly visa for people like me that are Americans called the DAFT visa. I've talked about it a bit on my blog. That allows me to take the company I had in the United States, create a new company here, and pretty much do the same things I was doing, just hopefully for more European customers, not just American customers. And so that really allowed us to make this sort of big move, sell everything we own, and, come over here with, my wife is rebuying everything we own right now, but that's a whole nother problem.
Yeah,
but it's quite an adventure, right? Like I cannot imagine.
Is.
Yeah.
And we picked Den Haag.
And you're also my neighbor. Like, not literally, but I also live in the Hague.
So. We looked at a number of cities. We knew we didn't want to be in Amsterdam because we wanted to live a more Dutch lifestyle than you really can in Amsterdam.
You don't live there.
Yeah. And we settled on Den Haag, and we started Dutch lessons with a tutor before we came over. We've started lessons now that we got here because it's important to us. Like this isn't. Ooh, we came over here for a 2-year vacation. We came over here to become part of the fabric of the Netherlands, and that was really important to us, and still is. Though my wife's learning Dutch way better than I am for some reason.
It's a hard language, right?
That's what I wish people would stop telling us that.
It's simpler than German.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We've lost a lot of the complexity that's still in German.
Yeah. Well, I will say that it has to be easier than English. Everything in English is an exception. You just have to learn.
Yeah.
Those 2 letters together could be pronounced 6 different ways depending on the word. Like.
Yeah. But
I don't know how you guys do it.
Well, I like you were mentioning in the beginning about the early days with your computer, and I remember me as like a 7-year-old boy with my dad's first PC. I learned my English from error messages, basically. But it's so normal, and I think the hardest thing to learn Dutch is basically because everyone is very proficient in English here,
Yeah.
and they will switch easily because we almost find an excuse to speak English. So if you even want to practice, like it's almost impossible. My wife is not original Dutch. I still speak English with her. Like, why not? It's both not our native tongue. But if you see, like everyone can switch, and especially these days, like you will. Well, you're now in The Hague, but if you get a service somewhere, if you go to a cafe or whatever, 9 out of 10 times, the waitress doesn't speak Dutch. They only speak English. That's it's it's really internationally oriented. So I can imagine the most Dutch you will hear during lessons, and that's about it.
Yeah, we've been actually pretty lucky. When I tried to learn Dutch back in the 90s, I was in Amsterdam, and no one would even try. Like they'd hear me, say "alsjeblieft," and they would go, "You're welcome." It's just immediate. Hasn't been as bad in Den Haag or The Hague as it was in Amsterdam. Like we can get a lot of people, and I think when they hear that we're trying, that they really help us. And there's a little place in The Hague called the Dutch Language Cafe. They do lessons, but they also do a lot of sort of immersion events. Like we're going to a pub night tonight that will be in Dutch with some English to help the beginners. And so it's a mix of different levels, and that's been really helpful to us. Evidently, you're not supposed to start. Evidently, you're not supposed to start learning Dutch the second day you're here, because everyone seems very baffled that we didn't wait 7 years to learn Dutch.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Oscar, do you know what time it is?
Is it already time for a totally random question?
It is time for a totally random question. Shawn, if you could only speak in movie quotes, which movie would you pick?
It's a good question, because most of my childhood was just in movie quotes.
Really?
And I have immediately I had 3 in mind, but I will pick Ghostbusters.
The original, right?
The original, yeah.
Why?
Thinking about the quotes in that one. But...
Yeah, there's just so...
He slimed me is probably the one that jumps to mind.
Yeah. No human would stack books that way. You little minx. I don't know whether you can publish this one, but Dickless over here doesn't. Dickless over here doesn't know what he's doing. Is that true? Yes, this man has no dick. Like they're endlessly quotable lines. Airplane and Caddyshack were the 2 and 3.
Caddyshack, of course.
Yeah, and Airplane. I mean, that's Leslie Nielsen, right?
Yeah.
It's I think.
What's your vector, Victor? I know that one.
Uh-huh.
We have Clarence. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, no, but I think indeed having these 3 movies, you could say whatever you want with those quotes.
My real issue is my wife's a little younger than me, and when we watched Airplane the first time, she was like, "Wait, none of those are your ideas. You've been stealing from movies your whole life." Well, yeah. It's the only way I had a personality until I was probably 30. Was just mimicking back things I thought were funny.
Yeah.
Well, borrowing. Yeah, but those are
classics.
Iconic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah.
For sure.
Like I'm also pushing all my kids to see those kinds of movies. Like these are funny, and sometimes you get like these not, but sometimes you get disappointed. Like, oh, this is actually really slow in hindsight.
Yeah.
But like my daughter loved Ghostbusters. We started watching it like last year, and
awesome.
There was also a new one out and stuff. And
2 actually already.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that they're still bringing the original actors that are available. Like Bill Murray is still in there, and that man.
It's so funny.
You start laughing as soon as he enters the.
He's an international treasure.
I think so.
I just adore almost everything he's done. I was really excited to show her Gremlins, because I remember really liking that, and it does not hold up. Like, it's fine, but when I first saw it, it was like, oh my god,
And now you see that it's puppets, and you see.
But
Yeah. All of that. And it's slow. It's way slower than I remember.
It's a bit slow indeed, and it was really scary as a kid. But
Yeah.
We're watching that as a family with Christmas. Is one of the list. Like we have Die Hard, Gremlins, those, and but this year I decided to find Gremlins 2. That was horrible.
It's bad. It's really bad.
It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of mean. Like if your kids are very young, it's way scarier than the first one.
Yeah, it's but it's so clumsy somehow, that one. Whatever.
We happened to be switching channels, and then I got past Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, which was hilarious, but it's so slow now. You can see a joke coming like not a mile but 10 miles away.
Yeah.
Then you have to wait for it to actually finally land. But
and then you're the dad that's already laughing in the sofa, like, here it comes.
Get ready.
This is gonna be good.
Oh, so funny. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's talk about technology.
yeah, maybe. So I'm switching back to the fact that some people have a natural urge to either be in a stage or say something about a technology or educate others. But having written having recorded more than 25 courses on Pluralsight, having authored more than 8 books, being connected to all of those international conferences that you've spoken to, like Techorama and TechBash and DevSum and Dev Connections, there has to be something in you that actually drives you. It's not only it's my job to learn, but there's something more behind that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical about it. To me, the fun part of what I do isn't just doing the conference or recording the course. It's I worked for Chris Sells many years ago. I don't know if you guys know him, but and he was sort of my mentor when I wrote my first book, and he got me to love the problem of the storytelling. I could list the facts out for you, and there's a lot of books that do that, but how do I convince you that this technology works? Like, get you to understand why, not just how. And that's really driven me continuously. Sure, I think at some level, I love performing as well. I get sort of a hit from being on stage, talking to people, seeing them learn. Like, one of the problems with video-based training is I don't get that. You can see in their eyes that they get it, that you get from conferences or live training. And so, yeah, I think part of it is like, I like that part of it. And I started by doing my first user group talk, and that sort of hooked me of like, oh, these things that, I've been teaching myself could actually help others. And through that, I started to go, oh, how do I have an arc of a story through a talk or through a lesson or through a course or through a video? Because I think that's kind of the thing is, I approach teaching first like, okay, I have these 400 facts and I need to shove them into these people's brains in 5 days. And that not only doesn't work, but it's painful for everybody.
Yeah.
In there.
Yeah.
On both ends, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because the style I've sort of taken is tied up in 2 ideas, and one is pragmatism. So I'm not worried about the sanctity of the code. I'm worried about the result of the code very much. And if that means you're going to take a shortcut because it gets you to the finish line faster, and therefore the company can sell more things and pay your salary, that's fine with me. Like, the ivory towerness of it doesn't appeal to me a lot. And the other is I like to teach by doing. So almost all my conference talks start with file new, like starting a new project and then writing the thing from scratch, because there's 2 things that gives people. One is that it's not just ideas, but it's like the practicality of how it works. But it also makes, I think, a lot of people realize that they can be fallible and it's fine. like mistakes are how you learn. And when I make a mistake in front of a group of people, I've learned to not freak out. I'm like, okay, you might have done this as well, and let's talk about why the mistake happened. Uh, and that could be just as much of a learning moment or a teaching moment than, you know, making sure your slides have more than 3 bullet points.
Well, actually, this is something that really reminds me of we've had Randall on the show a few episodes back, and he also said that by being fallible and by being up there and showing that maybe you also sometimes make a mistake, it takes away a little bit of the maybe the boundary of people trying to even enter this space.
Yeah.
So I really like the fact that you said that. What would be your advice or your line that you would give to people that are thinking about joining this community but are hesitant, or that think maybe tech is too complicated for me? What advice would you give them?
I'll give you a couple pieces of advice. One is, I think the outside world thinks that what we do has way more math involved than it does. Like, I really think that, especially in the United States, but maybe over here as well, that this idea that it's math centric scares a lot of people that maybe weren't very good at math or that struggled with it. And it's a whole different thing than that. And so I wouldn't let that hold you back. The other is that everyone makes mistakes, and that is how you make a better system. Like, there is no cost to writing code that fails. You're not going to destroy the system, or you're not going to embarrass yourself in front of your colleagues because they've all been there. If senior developers have all failed in the similar ways that you have, that, trying it out is part of that process. Like, when I am working on a system, I usually have a folder full of 100 of failed sort of first approaches that I learned from, and I'm happy to delete when it finally impacts what I'm actually doing. And that's, you hear that from artists and singers, and like, the mistakes is often where the magic is. But I think we as a culture, as a industry, seem to push people that, the 10 times developer and rock star developer somehow don't have any of those things. And I think, I've often think that the arrogance in our industry is just hiding the insecurity in our industry, right? I can't be wrong, because if I'm wrong, then I'm bad at what I do. And I just don't buy that. I just don't buy it.
Oh, and I fully agree with that one. And I think that's also, for some people, why things like pull requests or just code reviews are kind of scary.
Yeah.
But you are not your code, right? I mean, that's most important thing. You are not your code. And I mean, maybe somebody else has a different insight. Maybe it's a better insight, but if it improves the end result, then why fear it?
And in code reviews, both sides are learning. Like, when I review a PR for X, Y, or Z for a client or for my own projects, I will see how people have approached something that may affect how I start approaching that same problem. Like, there's a real benefit in that, because one of the challenges I had when I started managing people or running teams is that for a longer time than I'd like to admit, I would get upset that they didn't write the code the way I would, instead of write the code that accomplishes the job. And separating those two was really gave me a whole lot of freedom to, like, just because they didn't approach the way I do, how can I learn from this? Whether it's a junior programmer or someone who's a peer or someone that, has a lot more accomplished than me, you can learn from it all, because it's, there isn't a black and white way to do any job in this industry.
No, definitely. I think you will learn from all sides. Yeah, and indeed, the PR, I don't like when some discussions exist there. Like, and because, like, probably you're both right, or it both works. It's fine. Don't then go into discussion in the form, this one's better because then just find each other, find a whiteboard, explain your thinking towards that, because there is something where you're on that path, and then you're both really learning. Like sometimes you really see those there's just pure opinions just fighting each other. It's like, okay, stop this. Like it's useless. But indeed, reading someone else's approach, and if you can actually let go and properly read it, it's like, oh, I wouldn't have thought about this. And as for mistakes go, like I tend to with my teams, I always like when someone says like, "Yeah, I did this wrong." It's like, well, great. If you did it right in the first place, you didn't learn a thing. So that's a waste of time. Because that's like well, when I mentioned like I learned English from error messages, but I can remember like just bumping in, not even understanding what it says, but it was obviously wrong, finding the way that worked. Like it gives satisfactions. It's yours. It will stick much better than just reading the how-to and typing it over, because I think those exercises are a bit useless sometimes. So yeah, for me, that's how I learned, and I can imagine that works for most people. It's like the actual bump into something is like, this is a problem. I'll approach it differently. Because while doing that, I think you always in your head just check off like 4 or 5, 6 different approaches. And if something works in one go, it's like, that's just luck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Often.
Or
Go ahead.
I would say, or it is
or it turns out
such plumbing types. Or it's such plumbing types of code that you've written that we should be able to abstract it away.
Yeah, it shouldn't be even your problem. But
yeah.
And you get to a certain skill level, and then you seem to be the superstar or whatever, because you just run through the first couple of levels of that problem that you're facing there. Of course, that's magical and can be intimidating, especially when someone's also a fast typer. It's like, whoa. But it's their comfort zone at that moment. But if they hit the thing that they actually find interesting, they're struggling like a beginner.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, no matter what, one of the things that I had to get my head around with learning is the learning curve, right? And for me, it goes, I start learning and I find it difficult for some reason. So my first sort of plateau I get to is these people are stupid that wrote this. And then we get into, oh, I'm stupid. And then it sort of crests the hill where I understand how that all comes together. But being able to acknowledge that those phases happen. Like, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Oh, yeah, I'm not the dumbest guy in the room. Go on.
Yeah, and sometimes I also hit, why are people using this?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
we don't have time to talk about React.
I think we just covered the whole subject now. No, but also what you must not forget in that cycle, like you go through the cycle and sometimes feels like we're going through loops of that cycle, but basically every loop is one step further, and you sometimes forget that other people won't see it like that yet.
Yeah,
it's iterative, right? Yeah. Also the learning and the experience and everything. It's all iterative. It's all loops stacking on top of each other, bringing you forward each and every time you loop around.
Yeah.
And if you go back and look at your code and you're not critical of the decisions you made because you've learned things since, I'm not sure that I'm not sure you're being honest with yourself. Like every piece of code I've ever written, I go, oh, you know what? And that's just part of the problem too. Like of just sort of accepting, okay, this was as good as I was at that moment, or this is what the available information I had, or the available time that I had to do it. You know, this idea of shooting for perfect code, I think, is off the mark.
No, that's also assuming that it's will ever be done.
Yeah.
So I think going to that perfectness, you also just like locked it down for change probably, because it's only perfect in that state, in that way, and the code I know like that is successful will stick around for a while and need some iterations. But I think the same thing as like being critical on your own code and like seeing like this is fine in that time I knew this. It also counts for other people's code, and it mostly counts for other people's code, I think, because you should assume that everything you see, someone shows you or whatever, is like within the knowledge, the time, all the context that was there. This was the best choice by the person, because they're not doing some intentionally wrong thing there.
And like Shawn said, I mean, sometimes you also need to be pragmatic. So maybe there's a cleaner solution to something. But if that's just not what you're aiming for at that point in time, you just need it to work.
But if the dirty script in production is paying everyone's salaries at this moment, you shouldn't whine about it. Like, of course we can fix it up. But that is paying the bills.
Yeah, totally. So I would like to touch on one last subject. Is you now own, is it Wilderminds or Wilderminds?
Either, really. Because my name is Wildermuth, I'll often say Wilder, but in reality, I sort of promote it as Wilderminds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then let's keep it on Wilderminds. That's your company. What is it that you do, and because you also help other developers, right?
Yeah. So most of what I do is, I say most, it is that sort of plethora. So I'll work with individual companies and do instruction on site, virtual. I'll also go in and do architectural or code reviews, sort of high-level architecture. And I'll often do coaching as well, where they buy so many hours, and when their developers get stuck, they send me an email. We help them get unstuck. We open up, a Teams call, and occasionally I'll do project work, but that's not really where my passion, or frankly, where my gift is. Like, I can do it. I can run teams. I can project manage, I can hire people, but it's not the things I love. And so a lot of the other things I do as part of the company are really to push those initial few. I want to work with individual customers, but teaching is clearly where my love is. And so in the States, teaching is a bit oversaturated right now. So I've sort of moved into this more true consulting. I don't really take on contracting. That's sort of the difference there. One of our mottos is, we don't want you to need us. I want to come in, spend 20 hours with you, get you unstuck, or educate your team, or explain how this works, and then go away. Because frankly, I don't enjoy the last 50% of the project. Because once the itch of the problem is gone, I'm not having fun anymore. And so that's kind of the reason I've been doing this since 2007, is that is the part that, entertains me more than anything. And frankly, where I think I'm probably best at.
Yeah, and especially the fact where you said that you'll fly in somewhere, or teams in, or call in, and find that issue and get teams unstuck. That really asks for a specific type of mindset and a specific type of problem solving skills, or maybe initially problem finding skills, so that you can solve them. So probably that's one of your strengths as well, right?
I think so. And I always go into these things without blame. And I think sometimes I bring an expert in, they need to justify the high costs of their hourly thing, and they want to blame someone at the company for doing stupid things. I don't think blame matters. Even when I was in teams or running teams, blame isn't important at all to me. Let's find the right solution and let's move forward. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been successful with my customers is, I'm not going to go in and go, you don't have any unit testing. Oh, you're such a bad organization. No, you don't have unit testing because you've been on the VB6 product for 20 years and you haven't had time because you've been, patching everything and making sure that, payroll is done every month. Like, that's hard stuff for a smaller business.
It is. And especially, like we already kind of said earlier, if you have that thing that's in production and you want to look at how to migrate that to a more future targeted approach, then one of the things some consultants that I work with as well tend to do is, hey, why haven't you done this, or why? And that might sound like criticism on the current solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the current solution made it that you can be hired now.
It got you to where you are right now. So maybe be thankful of that solution, and now let's move into presumably a better solution for the future until the new reality kicks in, and then we'll do that loop again.
You want to reach different customers. You want to be able to address issues faster. Like, there has to be a payoff to all of that. Old code, I was told a long time ago, old code is good code. So there's a reason why we still have systems using COBOL and mumps. And, NASA still does most of their calculations using Fortran, because using Python to do it, they know the formulas already work. Why rewrite them for their own sake?
Yeah, totally agree. Shawn, is there anything that you would like to get back to, or anything that you would like to add to what we've already discussed?
I'm not really sure. One of the things that some people know about me, we sort of touched on it earlier, is filmmaking. And so I'm hoping that once we get our feet on the ground, I can start to think about what the next film I'm going to do is. I'm going to try to not make it quite as heavy as the last two films. The last two films were very heavy. But if anyone's interested in my films, you can see them at twainfilms.com.
I will make sure to add a link to that website in the description of the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure that Oscar would love to do a cameo in one of your movies. Right, Oscar?
Of course. Yeah, that's actually, there's like having an IMDb thing would be in my bucket list.
I can imagine.
I said that to someone once. So
yeah.
IMDb is a double-edged sword, though, because in order to keep your bio and picture, because you'll see listings where there's no pictures, that means they're not paying the yearly fee to be in IMDb.
Oh,
it's a racket.
On a course once, and it's like they were in a movie, and like some big guy with Harley Davidson. He's like, "I'll arrange that. I don't want a bill. I just want on the end credit so I can get in the IMDb thing."
Yeah. It's exciting. Don't get me wrong, but on both of the films, there's a bunch of empty pictures for the people that were in it, because paying $129 for a vanity picture. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I still do it. Like, I want my picture there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to pretend that I don't have an ego to stroke sometimes.
But that's, to be honest, I think that's also maybe in smaller amounts or to a smaller degree, but that's also a little bit why sometimes being up on that stage is nice as well, right? Or doing a podcast. Absolutely. And then if you see that people are listening or watching, then, I mean, it's also nice to see that people maybe find it interesting or enjoyable.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of why I continue to do the YouTube videos. I would like to tell you that my self-worth on a daily basis isn't based on how many new views I have of the latest video, but it's a little bit there. I'm trying to let it go. It
does influence it a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. It does. It does.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
It was great having you on. Thanks.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Beta Talks, the podcast. Beta Talks is made possible by BadBit Managed Software Development.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.